Just to introduce myself, I'm the Honourable Lord Guy de Dinan, a Breton of the 15th century, or in mundane life, a Briton of the 21st. I'm currently Seneschal of the Principality of Insulae Draconis, which is part of the Kingdom of Drakenwald, covering the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Iceland. Primarily, most of my SCA service career has been in recruitment and retention areas, learning as I go. I very much come from a point of view that organizations need to constantly recruit or they will simply cease to exist. The SCA is no exception. Like a shark, you've got to swim or you die. And why? Oh, there we go. My own experience in-person recruitment has been an evolution working with professional organisations, including the British Army, universities, geographic societies, and so on. The reason I'm mentioning these is not to establish some sort of authority figure, but to emphasise that it is both through success and failure that I've built up this approach, which is constantly evolving with each demo or fair. After 30 years or so, I am still learning, and this talk is about that learning process. In particular, I will talk about examining two SCA demos that I have led, one in 2011 and one in 2014, that provides insights into success and failure. Both of these were indeed deemed a success at the time. However, in at least one of these cases, I consider it a litany of missed opportunities and mistakes that has unfortunately meant that the time and effort of the volunteers who supported me was unfortunately wasted. This talk will primarily concentrate on the same venue as well, the London Docklands Excel Centre. So, I'm not offering a one true way for demos. I'm sure that Landon and Marest's talk later will widen and deepen your understanding of the mechanics. But what I'm hoping to do now is offer a barrage of questions that for you to think about when planning one so that you can run a demo, it runs well and is productive. Too often in a group, a demo tends to be an afterthought. It looks like too much work for people. It gets in the way of swinging a stick and gets left to individuals to drive when a group should be driving and is at fault for not supporting the effort. So I'll be dividing this talk into sections. Part one will be about the thought processes to consider prior to a demo. These events take time to sort out properly. Rushing or mismatching what we can offer to the event, or not putting in the thought, will lead to a poor display and poor results. Part two, the visible part of the event for our members, the event organisers and the audience. The demo itself, what we need to think about, the behaviours and what to look out for. Part three, the payoff, which is why we're here, the result from all that work. So before you plan, this is literally the stage where you have spotted an opportunity and need to sit down with pen and paper. Ask yourself, what am I actually wanting out of this demo? This might seem an obvious question to answer, but simply wanting more members is not the only possibility, and miscommunicating that objective is where I have seen volunteers refuse to support your demo. New volunteers is, in fact, a vague concept, but can be fleshed out with such considerations as to the type of event you're doing the demo at, the potential audience. This will all color your approach. Additionally, a demo is more than just physically acquiring new people off the street or convention floor. For example, I have met people coming to an event specifically to meet us. To improve chances, signpost your presence at an event on your group's website and social media. It could entice the curious to meet you in an open and public place rather than committing to a very closed environment. Other objectives to keep in mind are you doing this to support the venue? For example, this involves building a relationship with a venue that you'd like to use for something else, a future event, for example. So gaining that confidence, that relationship between you and a venue is a valid choice for a demo. Are you using the demo for simple publicity. This in of itself is valuable. Contrary to what some members think, in the UK, we're actually not very known as the SCA, even inside the historical scene. There are about 50 to 60,000 reenactors in this country. In SCA terms, we're minnows, we're very tiny. Thus, visibility is a valuable outcome. I constantly look for events that will meet this objective. These are also valid objectives, but you need to be clear to your volunteers as well about what this event will benefit and bring to your group. Start your follow-up plan now. We will address this later, but you need to be thinking about how you are going to convert your results and your sign-ups before you get to the demo. Importantly, very importantly, do you actually have the time to do this? There is no point in overstretching yourself. You're risking burnout, you're risking physical tiredness, poor decision making, and poor leadership of your demo. This will show up in your relationship with your volunteers, your event venue, and also your potential audience. I've had to withdraw from a demo before because of personal work circumstances. I've also had to retire because I was too exhausted. I did not have time to focus or prepare properly and did not want to take the risk of being grumpy with potential audience members. It's just not worth the risk. Do your event research. There is very little point in organising a full armoured combat tournament for your local spinning and weaving show, unless they've actually asked for it. Finally, write things down. If it isn't written down, it isn't happening. Set up your organising online. Use something like Google Sheets or a Trello board, or whichever documentation method works best for you and your team. Make sure your key volunteers have access to this document. One point of note, though, is how you handle personal information of both your volunteers and sign-ups. So keep that in mind. So in Europe, we have what we call the GDPR regulations. The event. It is possible to show up, do your thing, and go home again, but that is reducing your return on the time, effort, and money your team is investing. However, researching your venue will improve things on the day. It will help you understand what you can and can't do. So for a personal example, discovering that the chandeliers in the demo hall are in the reach of our fighters' polearms was a good one to find out the hard way. Placing your audience was another, crowd control, safety, and so forth. Who else will be attending and what will they be doing? So, for example, there is no point in trying to compete with an arena show of 50 plus Vikings smashing each other in a melee when you only have 4 or 5 fighters in the same large open space. So model your show and tell, which includes the fighting, to maximize your resources and unique storytelling points. Our solution for this problem is to set up our own fighting arena to one side, and therefore have a more intimate audience experience. Understand your audience. Who is likely to come along to this show or demo? How generalist or self-selected is this audience? For example, appealing to sci-fi and fantasy fans will require tuning your message compared to, say, the public coming to your local county show. Why is the audience there? Likely it is to be entertained, and you need to show how entertaining your activities are. Other events will have more emphasis on signing people up, such as university fresh affairs, although they too can have their own complications. And it will be the simple things that will catch you out, so do put in the brain time. Do you need electricity or running water on site? Are they available? Is there somewhere to change from your mundane to your SCA clothes? Can you bring your vehicles up to the demo area? Or do they have time restrictions to be on and off site? Where are your vehicles to be parked? How far is it from the car park to your stall? What are the public transport links like? When does the event open and close? What food outlets are available? Can you attach things to walls? If not, do you have freestanding poles? Do you need a ladder? So to help with this, working with the event organizers is vital. You need to have a good rapport with them. Be patient and use plain English. SCA jargon often goes over the heads of venue organisers. You'll then find organisers don't quite understand what we do and are likely also very busy and potentially flustered in their own right. I've had to explain that no, we do not, our knights on the ground are not jousters. Understand what our role in their event is. Are we just simply extra entertainment? Are we variety, extra scenery, so forth? That will give understanding of context, what you can and can't do. My personal favorite is still the venue that was absolutely convinced that we were wanting to be turning up with full jousting armored horses with on a scheduled ancient monument. So basically, make sure you have explained who and what we are with an absolute minimum of the jargon. Are the event organizers expecting us to perform or otherwise interact with the crowd? We have done this for events before. So, for example, doing taster sessions, making sure we have a herald who can talk a good talk and narration of what is going on. And remember, though, we are not reenactors. And be very wary that your participation is not displacing reenactment groups who rely on paid event income to keep their hobby going. We're not a free alternative. And that way leads to difficult relationships with other groups, venues, and our own reputation in general. So work on your way to explain this. I like to use phrases like hands-on history, learn the skills of the past, arts and crafts and combat society, and so on. Get used to your own particular version of this. Clarify as early as possible whether or not your volunteers are going to be charged for entry. There are some events that they are self-funding, like ourselves, by all volunteers paying membership for the event. Fan conventions are usually like this, so like Worldcon and so forth. I have very little time for the pay to demo complaint that SCA members sometimes do. Now I'll talk about that in a moment. Your key piece of information, if you can obtain it, will be an estimate of footfall. How many people are they expecting to come to the event? For established events, this is usually quite easy to find out. Big events use passive monitoring, like logging people's mobile phone signal. Other events will have been ticketed. New and open events are likely to spitball a figure, so look carefully at this to see if it is actually plausible, and beware optimism bias from both yourself and the event organizers. We have been to events where the reenactors, traders, and ourselves have actually outnumbered the public. This is a classic sign of organizers not organizing their event publicity well, and there are ways that this can be mitigated. A classic example was a festival in North London at the Waltham Abbey Gunpowder Mills. Footfall was appallingly bad, and the setup was too spread out. Our half dozen or so fighters were swallowed up by the size of the main arena, and we would have been better off just keeping to ourselves in our own camp, which we have organised with events since. Pay attention to costs. Don't forget to think about your materials, and you might be asked for a stall fee. This is not a deal breaker if you can get the funds from your SCA group. But for example, I have been asked for £500 a day, about $600, to put on a stand by a university freshers fair, which was one of the largest freshers fairs in London that we were trying to get into, on the grounds that we were an external organisation. We were ultimately also told that our activities were too militaristic. Another reason why you need to understand your organizer and venue. It might seem funny now, but how we see ourselves and how others see us is front and center to the entire demo process. You must also look at travel and accommodation. Considerations as you need to answer this to your potential volunteers. There will be times when an opportunity is just not viable as you cannot get the numbers to the location in question. So consider scaling up or scaling down your presentation depending on the numbers who confirm, and not just think it is a good idea. So, for example, responses to Facebook events do not necessarily translate to bums on seats. Setup and takedown times are important. Find out when you can access the site to set up and when you can take down and leave. Some sites will not allow takedown until the public have left. This will impact on some of your volunteers if they have travelled far. Your own publicity is important, something to think about in general, as those demo events also offer an opportunity for publicity. So make sure someone's about with a camera to take pictures of your demo, the general event, and to pull together an update for your website and social media. It is just as important to tell our members that we've gone and done this. It builds up enthusiasm and activity for later. Recruiting your volunteers. Your volunteers will determine what you can do. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's often overlooked. My first statement here, but look at what your demo finally looks like will depend on your numbers and what people are willing to do. I've done the solo stall before. It isn't fun. Thus, you need to consider what a minimum number of volunteers will be for each activity, including just minding the stall. People need breaks to go get food, see what else is going on. Quantity is a quality of its own. It aids visibility. And with my previous mention for a melee demonstration, for more the merrier. My rule of thumb is 6 just to run the stall, especially if the demo is at a weekend event. We will get into roles and functions presently. With fighting demonstrations, the number of fighters will obviously dictate what you can do. 1 to 2 fighters, and you're looking at a show and tell plus some bouts. A fight compared with flair and storytelling will last longer, but you'll need to understand the novelty factor and determine what with your fighters what you can do. The best fencing demonstration with 2 fighters I saw lasted 45 minutes, but that was because it was compared and went into detail appropriate to the discerning rapier enthusiast or audience in front of it. It was going through individual positions and comparing Italian to German fighting standards, for instance. Now, pitching your event to your members. Demos can have a reputation of being boring and regarded as a chore, appealing only to those who are willing to deal with the public. From the start, being proactive against this is key. Presenting to your group is as important as presenting to the public. Show why this demo is important, how it fits into your group's scene, and what individual members can benefit from doing something for it. Very early on, I realized that a demo is just another form of SCA event. We've had our own events at venues with the public wandering around for years without much interaction or recruitment. So use the demo as an event within the event. Get a marshal on board and you have an official fighter practice. You can run authorizations in front of the public. The public won't notice a difference. They will see some practice fights alongside your show-off fights. Now, a note on show-off fights. Pay attention to your audience. One of our demo tournaments missed a massive trick with a group from a reenactment society watching the fight. It was a simple 1-to-1 format tournament, but could have been rounded off with a melee fight finale, which would have chimed in with the group fighting style that the reenactors would go for. If you can, get some table space and ask your artisans if they fancy working on projects while the public see them work. At Worldcon, we had scribes working through their scroll backlog, and our seamstresses were also busy. Additionally, look out for ways to participate in the event you are demoing at. For example, in a convention, offer to join in a panel, run a workshop, do a talk on how SCA connects with the event theme. This attracts attention, blends into the theme, and also shows the willingness of the SCA. I've delivered historical talks to event audiences before, for example. Members have joined in panels discussing the effect of the SCA on fantasy literature. We have a stable of famous fantasy and sci-fi authors as members that you can name drop. Most importantly, pay attention to your volunteers. They are committing time and finances to come along and promote the society. My overriding philosophy is volunteers ought to be having fun as well as participating. So promote the event you're attending as something to participate in and not just the demo. And that includes yourself. Have fun at the event yourself. Take breaks. Make sure your volunteers have the information they need, parking, etc. we've mentioned. Support them where you can. Set up a rota. Prioritize their interests in the event. Don't impose time limits, though. I've worked with some people who are happy to stay on the stand and talk to people all weekend. However, make sure that they too are taking breaks. Lastly, be prepared to scale your demo, even on the day itself. So, for example, at Worldcon, we had additional volunteers emerge from the audience, which was very handy for additional marshalling and crowd control. It is also possible you need to scale down as well. At the same event, we had to pull several participations in the panels due to specific volunteers not being available on the day. So let's focus on the event within an event concept for a moment. The pay to demo concept is pernicious. It pisses me off, and it is such a wrong mindset to take into a mundane event. It will show to the audience. Try to use the event to appeal to your volunteers. My mantra for conventions is come for the convention, spare a few hours for the SCA. And this is how our members have ended up meeting the likes of George R.R. Martin, Charlie Stross, Robin Hobb. Look carefully at the space you get to use. What other activities can you put on with who you have and what you have got? We've already done several weekend camps as demos, and this is honestly my personal favorite format, running our cooking. We're effectively getting free campsite or workshop space. We have used them as an excuse to air tents before or after a major event, camping and shopping opportunities, and have even held full courts. Cooking is its own attraction. And make it an official event. Put it on your Kingdom calendar. Pre-publicity for a demo is another key step in your checklist, as it generates the opportunities. Use your social media to tell people you're going to be at an event. Invite them to meet you. I've met people on the stand saying they didn't realize we would be at an event. So that was something that we needed to fix. What is the event publicity like? This is where a lot of, for want of a better description, amateur event organizers go wrong in woefully underestimating the amount of publicity a public event needs. Others, such as established conventions or medieval events like the Battle of Evesham or Tewkesbury, run a full professional quality campaign and highlight their participants. So find out what the organisers are doing for publicity. Can you get your name and image onto their publicity? Get them to work for you. This can be in the form of posters, leaflets, websites, social media, possibly even local print or broadcast media. How much would it cost to get a full advert in their official event brochure? There is also nothing stopping you from contacting the local media yourself. Local media is often derided for having minimal audiences. However, that is more audience than not doing it. Local Knights Visit School is a regular strapline for reenactors, for instance. So access your media officer or seneschal for advice on refining and improving such a message. Take a good look at your own materials. You'll need to think about how it will compare to other materials at the event. We are beyond the 1980s or 1990s folksy black and white photocopied materials I still see. Whether or not it is a student fresh affair, a gaming convention, or a living history gathering, you will be up against the money, volunteers, positioning, and design quality of other organizations seeking members. There's plenty of free and easy to use software out there. Canva.com is your friend. So be up to date. Make sure the details on your publicity are up to date. I had to chunk nearly $100 worth of leaflets because I forgot to check that. Get design advice. Think about your own experiences in visiting shows as a punter yourself. What leaflets caught your eye? What remained in your bag on the way home and what went into the recycling bin? Try a variety of leaflet formats. Split your message between them. One that's fighter heavy, one that's arts and crafts heavy. De-jargonize. Above all, make sure you have the time and money and do not underestimate the cost. Request a budget from your group. Do not be surprised at the cost of the amount of money per contact you are receiving. It isn't cheap. Communication with your volunteer. Oh, hello. I might have skipped a slide. Have I skipped a slide? No, my notes are different, but I'll talk through the notes anyway. Communication with your volunteers is your first priority. Make sure they have as much information about the site as yourself and know where and when they're expected. If you have specific responsibilities, make sure people know what they're doing, e.g. setting up the cook's work area, display setup, decorations, etc. The riskiest single point of failure of a demo is you. Make sure you have a deputy who can pick up the organising, especially on the day. What very few people knew about our Worldcon demo in 2014 is I went down with food poisoning halfway through and had to hand off. Luckily, everyone knew what they were doing and what was needing to be done, and I was confident of being able to go home and recover. Remember what I said about write everything down. Make sure your materials are ticked off for packing. Know who is storing what materials before and after the event. Who is taking stuff home? Boxes of leaflets have been left behind before, and improvised sign-up sheets are a poor reflection if you've forgotten to bring them. Your sign-up sheets is another thing. You need at minimum name, email, and a data protection statement, depending on your jurisdiction. Additional info can be helpful, but can be overfamiliar. Simply ask for hometown and permission to let the nearest branch contact them. Tell them to check their spam folders. Without taking contact details, you're reducing your effectiveness to almost zero. So let's think about the demo and the event itself and think about crowd dynamics. So this photo here is a wargaming convention that I'll talk about what's going on in the picture. At first glance, it just looks like a bunch of blokes looking at a display case. But there's a lot else happening here. Next time you go to an event that's not an SCA event, like a market or a show or a festival or a county fair, watch how the crowds flow. So there are two major types of crowd going on here. There are those who are engaging with the stand, and there are those who are the moving traffic. Note the use of vertical signage in this picture. The vast majority are moving past in a central route. They're usually of two types: the determined who know where they're going or are not interested in being distracted. The slower, more relaxed moving crowd members are just visually grazing. They're looking at a distance for stuff that might catch their eye. They're deliberately far enough away not to be directly engaged unless you physically approach them. At Worldcon, we exploited this. For one, we were positioned in a crowd bottleneck, which was very useful. Secondly, we put volunteers in kit into that traffic flow to hand out leaflets, inviting people to come and talk to us at the stall. This is a tactic I stole from recruiting at the British Army. However, beware of causing a roadblock yourself and tell your volunteers to move to one side if they end up in a conversation. Creating crowd blockages will annoy the organisers. So, getting noticed. There's nothing worse and nothing more uninteresting than seeing one or two people behind a desk with nothing to pull people over. Materials are flat on the table. Your volunteers are looking bored or scrolling on their phone. Seen it, done it, thankfully not doing it again. I see recruiting in the SCA as a sift process. You start with a series of interested people. A subset will sign up. A subset will then respond to your welcome message. A subset will turn up for a taster session, and then a subset of that will stay and join. However, at the outset, at the demo, it will be very difficult to predict who will make it to that last stage. The object of the demo is to funnel people to you to sign up and take an interest in the SCA, maximizing the first step. But you're working in an environment where you will have competition for attention. Getting that attention is critical. I've already touched on the crowd dynamics. The point will be to start your hook out in the mass of the people. Don't wait until they're in front of you across the table. Noise. Done well, it will attract curiosity. Done badly, you're simply adding to the chaos and stress. A fighting display generates a lot of noise. Having a heraldic voice also helps as an explainer and framer of what people are looking at. Music can also be a boon and a nightmare. Live music is wonderful and is a performance focus in its own right, but tinned music is more difficult to handle. Notwithstanding any public performance rights issues, it can provide a nice ambience, but also can act against your volunteers trying to hold conversations. Live musicians can start and stop according to pace and need, and sound quality on speakers will irritate. Multiple sources of noise at an event can also put people off, being sensitive and overwhelming. So, for example, that's demo uh, here is in effectively a giant hangar. This was a very, very noisy event. Movement is eye-catching. Fighting displays work well, so do dance displays. Mix up your dances to be both sedate and lively. Those volunteers in garb handing out leaflets for you, get them to move about. It creates a feeling of activity centered on your stand. Flapping flags and banners outside also attract the eye. Colour. Our period is colourful. Bright colours attract. This applies to our banners and clothing. And one of the best displays I've seen has been Flintheef's creation of little flags for the audience to wave when the fighting is on, cheering on their specific fighter. They could take those home. Cunningly, we'd printed our contact details on the bottom of the flag. It was also a great interactive evidence element connecting us to the audience. Combined with movement, it got a lot of attention. Height. Remember that photo of the crowd? See all those banners at the background? That is standard in most conventions and most trade fairs. So use it ourselves. Tents, awnings, poles, flags. It's all about catching the eye line at the distance in the center of that traffic flow. Invest in a simple marquee banner with the most basic message possible, either Society for Creative Anachronism or a simple slogan like Hands on History or similar. Convey who we are, not just the name. We can also use draw up banners that you see at trade fairs. They're an excellent and durable investment. Access. This is a key point to remember. While you will be at the mercy of your venue placement, think about your presentation. Your banners and your table can easily become a barrier. Equally, you'll be wanting to show off your displays. It is possible for people to crowd and block your display. Is your display accessible for wheelchairs? You really don't want people talking to a poster and not the person trying to get their attention. Make sure anyone doing a demonstration of their arts and crafts is easily visible. And pace yourself. Demos are long, so do make sure your volunteers, and especially yourself, are taking breaks, have enough time to enjoy the event, and are sufficiently hydrated and fed. Once someone comes over, you have about 5 seconds to gain a browsing person's attention. Be friendly and try to minimize the stall as a barrier to your conversation. Come out in front of it to have the conversation. Be confident, but respectful. Don't come across as you needing them. Read their body language. Open up with a question, e.g. ask them about what in history are they interested in. Don't ask them if they are interested in history. They're already in front of your stand. It is a conversation, but it is also a sales patter. It seems obvious, but listen to their responses. It personalizes the conversation and allows you to select from your knowledge of what the SCA does that will appeal to them the most. Importantly, it also allows you to work out whether or not they will be responsive or just browsing or tire kicking. Tire kickings are really annoying and come in various types. Usually it is someone who just wants to show off their own historical knowledge. Other types include the piss taker, wanting to pick a fight over an aspect of the SCA being too historical or not historical enough, or just simply being a waste of time. Try not to encourage them or go defensive on this. Just best to nod and smile and wait, and they eventually wander off. If one of your volunteers gets caught by such a person, bail them out. Ask the volunteer to come to you, or that you've got a message or a task for them, or and bail them out that way. Break the conversation. For a genuinely interested person, get into what hobbies they already have and talk in those terms. Minimize the SCA lingo, but compare what we're doing with what their modern version is doing. You do not need to recite the information leaflet you're handing them. Introduce it as more details and keep the conversation basic. Ask if they'd be happy to give you their contact details. Let them know the date of your next event and politely close the deal. Thank them for your time and say you're looking forward to meeting them again. So let's move on to the case studies. This is Salute 2001. This is where we got the banner photo from. This is the largest war games show in the UK with about 11,000 footfall. This is very tempting for us, and I'd love to get back. With 9 volunteers, we presented a tabletop version of the Combat of the 30, which is a Penzic fighting tournament format. We gained about 8 or 9 sign-ups, 2 turned up for a few revels and then drifted away. Even with a 6-month planning window, this was high pressure, especially in providing creating the actual war game itself. So the issues that we had here, we were not visible enough. We were up against some very spectacular displays and lots of banners and so forth. We did not. We were up. Other display games had information boards. They had flags of the people who were originally on the battlefield itself. The venue was huge, so noise was mangled. You almost had to shout in a few places. Our table was badly positioned so that the backs of the players were what the browsers saw and not the figures on the table. We relied on our volunteers and kit to be visible, and we had them mobile leafleting. But we're not the only group doing that. And Regia Angelorum, which is a Dark Ages reenactment society, had 30 people and were doing a central arena battle twice each side of lunch. You couldn't hear anything when they were going. Game itself was not really good. We didn't play test it, so there's a lot of problems. And we had nothing vertical. So no major wow factor, no vertical visibility, no noise, view was blocked for passers-by. Would I do this show again? Yes. However, I would max out on the principles I've been talking about and go with a large display game of a major battle. I'd also look for more interactive opportunities with crowds, so like dress up at night and so forth. Now, moving on 3 years, we're looking at Worldcon 2014. 5-day event, 20 plus volunteers, 2-year planning window. First outing of the demo principles I'm talking of. We had 64 sign-ups, 18 subsequent attendees, many of whom are still playing nearly 10 years later. We met all the principles here of layered volunteer gauntlet, glossy leaflets, verticals, volunteers in front of the table, a dominant fighter display that doubled as a practice. We did calligraphy. We had people taking their names home, so they had things to take home with them. We did lose some volunteers offering panels, and the budget was limited. Follow-up was successful, and we are looking at Worldcon 2024 this coming summer. So this is a small venue, and this is more likely the sort of activities that we'll be doing. It's not about grand demonstrations, so this is sort of like a shire or a canton level. This is what commonly known as a geek convention, is a mix of anime, cosplay, gaming, and LARP in Huntingdon, which is a historical town near Cambridge. I reviewed how to create a demo here, and this is a worked example of applying these principles. It's a small demo, so I needed to consider what we can do with the space. And I also asked a local member to scout the venue and the local area, looking for car parks, for instance. These are photos from a previous event, so the space is limited, footfall likely small. However, you've got a self-selected audience that are probably a lot more amenable to being interested in what the SCA offers. The location was attractive. Huntingdon was on the National Rail network, so we could get people in there quite easily. It was also in easy range of existing SCA activity, so we did not need to support new activity 2, 3, 4 hours away. Excellent relations with the organisers, 2 of whom were actually members of the SCA. So they knew what we were about, they knew what we were talking about and what to expect. Series of allied hobbies. And the main problem we identified was that the event was actually going to clash with an existing SCA event. This is a classic issue with some events that we do short-term planning cycles for, which will be a problem. So do watch your calendar. So follow-up. This is the entire reason why we're here. Questions. Is your group ready to actually bring new people on board? How many people can you realistically cope with turning up? Your group needs a reception plan. Who will welcome them? Who will look after them throughout the day or evening? And provision for loaner kit. Keep the invitation realistic. Do not set minimum requirements such as them requiring kit in the first place, because that will act as barriers, especially if they're considering you one of 3 or 4 new hobby areas. You should have a reception event set up. Doesn't need to be more than a shire revel or potluck. I term these revels as newcomer optional revels, so that you'll be to holding them as an event where the group can have fun, whether or not the new people show up. That way, people are not unhappy if all they've done is turn up and expect new people and nobody turns up. They should be getting on with having their own fun, their own fighter practice, and so forth. As I say, we had 18 new people show up to the first newcomer revel after Worldcom. They were treated to a taster session of fencing, heavy fighting, costume making, illumination, and calligraphy. Nothing more than, say, 20, 30 minutes at a time. We also had a mead and beer tasting. They were also followed by a sit-down potluck meal where the newcomers were treated and not required to chip in for the hall hire or the food. They were effectively guests and they were treated as such. What I didn't figure out beforehand was that we had information that other shires would be interested in. And unfortunately, they did not act on these new contacts simply because those questions I asked at the beginning of this slide were not asked of them. Keep your invite short and friendly. Ask a couple of questions in that invite in order to encourage a response. It will improve response rates. Only contact via details given on the form. Outreach via other means, such as social media stalking, is frankly rude. Seems obvious, but I have been asked about this tactic before. Destroy the sign-up sheet and electronic files once you've used them for the purpose that you've stated in your data statement. Another thing to bear in mind is that you should not be wasting effort chasing down forlorn hopes. My rule of thumb here is 3 equally spaced attempts to contact. After that, do not waste your time. You need to concentrate on who you have attracted. That said, it has been known for people to come back to me after 2 years. But at the end of the day, you need to look after your own game and your own enjoyment of the SCA. And that pretty much wraps up my talk. So I'd like to hand over and call it a day there. So looks like there are some chat questions in the chat. Right, so what have we got? Okay, no chat. I'll open the floor. If you've got a question, just chuck it in the chat and I'll see if I can unmute. How do I train volunteers to interact with the public? What is a good way to combat a date conflict between a demo and an SCA event? Right, I'll take the first one from Alina. How do you train volunteers to interact with the public? When you bring in your volunteers, I would totally recommend that you have meetings beforehand, either on Discord or Facebook or so forth. You can get a sense of who is and who would be the most useful in terms of whether or not they would be face to face with people or whether they'd be better off sort of like helping with the leaflets or helping with the set design and so forth. There isn't really any real training on that. You do pick it up as experience. I do brief them on the set of questions I was putting forward. So explain to them how to do the 5 second, the elevator pitch. have them understand that they can be bailed out and to look out for each other. Um, and it depends on the topics. If the biggest problem I see coming from that is when people try and answer a question they actually don't know about. So, for example, if somebody approaches you and you don't know anything about heavy fighting, just simply say, "I don't know, but however, my colleague over here is a fighter. He or she can explain that for you." Try and avoid trying to make explain things that you don't actually are not familiar with. Um, what is a good way to combat a date conflict with a demo and SCA event? There are we've tried multiple things. We have actually tried to do a demo on top of an SCA event before, and we split off a team of 12 that went to effectively a village fair. And whilst that demo was successful, we got some very good members out of it, including an addition to our equestrian. It broke up the rhythm of the SCA event itself. So you either should appeal carefully because you're effectively asking for people to step away from an SCA event, and that could be interesting for the event organizer. However, if it's like a fighter practice and you've got a demo down the road and people who are not, are not interested in fighter practice, try and ask them to volunteer to come to that demo. Alternately, and this is something I am seriously considering with a very big gaming expo that's coming up next year, which clashes with one of our major fighting events, is look to the publicity that the event is offering. So I'm thinking of simply paying for a half page or a whole page advert spread in the event brochure. So there's no, as I say, there's no one true way about it, but there are options that are available. How long after a demo should there be a newcomer's optional event? This is a very good question, and it is a bit of a rule of it's sort of like a bit of a suck it and see. Personally, I would say not more than 3 or 4 weeks. However, if it's like depending on the size of the event, really. Some people already know what they're doing for the following weekend. The weekend after is good. The weekend after that at 3 weeks is good. But 4 weeks, they've probably gone cold. So time it about 2 to 3 weeks after your event.